The unexpected encounter. Jake was just a regular mechanic, living a quiet life in a small town. His shop was tucked away on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by tall trees and the hum of passing cars. He liked it that way, simple and peaceful. His days usually consisted of fixing cars, trucks, and the occasional motorcycle. But today, something was different. It started early in the morning, when the sky was still a faint shade of orange. Jake was working under the hood of an old sedan, grease staining his hands. He was focused, not expecting anything unusual to happen. But then, a loud crash broke through the silence, shaking the ground beneath him. The sound was so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. Jake jumped up, heart racing. He looked around, trying to find the source of the noise. At first, he thought it might have been a tree falling or something crashing into his shop. But when he looked up, his eyes widened in shock. A large, silver object was falling from the sky, its shape unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was sleek, smooth, and seemed to shimmer as it cut through the air. The object spun wildly, sending sparks flying from its surface. It crashed hard into the field next to his shop, sending dirt and debris flying into the air. The sound of the crash echoed for miles. Jake stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a meteor. It was something else. Without thinking, he grabbed a wrench and ran toward the crash site. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the tall grass, heading toward the wreckage. As he got closer, Jake could see the object more clearly. It was a ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen. The surface was shiny and metallic, with strange markings etched along the sides. It didn't look like anything from Earth. Jake's mind raced. What was this thing? And more importantly, was anyone inside? He crept closer to the ship, carefully stepping over the broken pieces of metal that littered the ground. The air around him felt strange, almost electric, as if the ship was still alive. His curiosity got the better of him, and he slowly moved toward the hatch. It was a small door on the side of the ship, barely visible behind the twisted metal. Just as he reached out to touch it, the hatch suddenly opened with a hiss. Jake stepped back, startled. His eyes widened in disbelief as a figure emerged from the ship. At first, he thought it might be a human, but as the figure stepped into the light, he saw that it was something entirely different. The woman standing before him had pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her hair was long and silver, flowing behind her like a river of light. Her eyes were an intense shade of violet, and they stared at Jake with a look that was both curious and calculating. She looked injured. Her clothes, a shimmering fabric that seemed to shift in color, were torn in several places. Blood, greenish in color, was slowly dripping from a wound on her arm. Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. His mind raced, trying to understand what he was seeing. Was this some sort of elaborate prank? But nothing about this seemed fake. It was all too real, too strange. The woman slowly looked around, her eyes scanning the area. She seemed disoriented, but she managed to stay on her feet. Jake took a cautious step forward, trying to make sense of the situation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice shaking. The woman turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, Jake felt a strange chill run down his spine. She said nothing at first, just studying him with a piercing gaze. Finally, she spoke in a voice that sounded both soft and strong. "I am damaged." Her words were slow, as if she were translating them in her mind. "My ship is broken." Jake was still in shock, but he felt a strange urge to help. This wasn't something he had ever been prepared for, but he knew one thing for sure. This woman needed help. He stepped closer, his instincts taking over. "You're hurt," he said, glancing at her arm. "Let me help you. I'm a mechanic. I can fix things." The alien woman blinked, then gave a slight nod. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep weariness. She trusted him, or perhaps she didn't have any other choice. Jake quickly assessed the situation. He knew nothing about alien technology, but he was good with machines. He had a feeling he could fix whatever had gone wrong with her ship. It was his best shot at getting her the help she needed. "I'll take a look at your ship," he said. "Stay here, and I'll see what I can do." The woman nodded again, her gaze never leaving him. There was something mysterious about her, something that made Jake feel as if he were on the edge of something much bigger than he could understand. As he turned and walked toward the wreckage of her ship, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning. The world he knew, the simple life he had lived, was about to be changed forever. And with that thought, he began working on the alien ship, not knowing that the moment he touched it, his life, and the fate of humanity, would never be the same. The mysterious passenger. Jake carefully examined the wrecked alien ship, his hand shaking as he wiped the dirt from its smooth metallic surface. It felt strange, like nothing he had ever touched before. The ship's surface shimmered in the sunlight, almost as if it were alive. He had worked on countless vehicles in his life, but this was something entirely different. It wasn't just an ordinary machine, it was otherworldly. Turning back to the alien woman, who stood leaning against the wreckage, Jake felt an unease settle in his chest. Her violet eyes never left him. They watched him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, yet strangely captivated. There was something about her, something about the way she looked at him, that told Jake she wasn't just any ordinary traveler. "Are you sure you're okay?" Jake asked again, his voice softer this time. She had only nodded earlier, but her silence left him with more questions than answers. Why was she here? Where had she come from? And why had her ship crashed on Earth? The woman, whose name he still didn't know, looked down at her wounded arm, her fingers lightly brushing the greenish blood that had dried against her skin. She winced slightly, but she didn't seem concerned. Her attention quickly returned to Jake, and her gaze felt as though it pierced straight through him. "I am not from here," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "This place, your world, it is not mine, but I have no choice but to stay." Jake blinked, processing her words. She was not from Earth. He had guessed as much, but hearing her confirm it made his mind race with even more questions. He tried to keep his voice steady as he replied, I know you're not from around here, but if you need help, I'll do what I can." The woman seemed to consider his words for a moment. "I need more than help," she said slowly. "I need my ship fixed, and time is running out." Her voice had a strange urgency to it now, and Jake couldn't help but feel that something much bigger was at play. Jake glanced at the ship again, inspecting it more closely. It wasn't just broken, it was deeply damaged. The ship's hull was crumpled, and the engine section looked like it had been severely compromised. He wasn't sure if he could fix it, but he knew he had to try. He had no idea what this woman had been through or who, or what, she was running from, but there was something about her that made him want to help. "Where are you from?" Jake asked, still unable to wrap his head around the situation. The woman took a deep breath, clearly struggling with how to explain. "I am from a distant place," she said, "a place far beyond your stars. My people—" She paused as if weighing the importance of her next words. "My people and yours, we are connected, but not in the way you might think." Jake wasn't sure what she meant. The only thing he knew for sure was that she needed help, and it was clear the ship wasn't going to fix itself. He picked up his wrench and approached the damaged engine. As he began to inspect it, he heard her voice again. "You are not just fixing a ship, Jake," she said, her voice low but compelling. "You are helping me survive. Without your aid, this world will be lost." Jake turned to look at her, his heart racing. There was something unsettling about her words. What did she mean by "this world will be lost"? Was she referring to her ship's breakdown? Or was there something more? "Wait, what do you mean by that?" Jake asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. The woman met his gaze and held it for a long, tense moment. "If I cannot repair my ship," she said, "my enemies will find me. And when they do, this world will be caught in the crossfire. You do not understand the consequences of helping me, but you will soon." The warning in her voice sent a chill down Jake's spine. He wasn't sure if she was just trying to scare him, or if there was some deeper truth to her words. But something about her seemed genuine. He didn't understand everything, but one thing was clear. Helping her wasn't just about fixing a broken ship. It was about something much larger than himself, and possibly larger than Earth itself. "Okay, all right," Jake said, trying to calm his nerves. "Let's focus on getting your ship fixed first. We'll deal with the rest later." He tried to sound confident, but inside, his mind was spinning. He had no idea what kind of trouble he was getting into, but there was no turning back now. As he turned back to the ship, the woman stepped closer. She didn't seem to move as much as a normal person would, but rather with a strange, fluid grace. Her presence felt powerful, but also fragile, like something on the edge of breaking. Jake wasn't sure what to make of it, but he couldn't deny the feeling that his life was about to change forever. "I can help you," she said softly, almost as if she were reading his mind, "but you must trust me. Trust that this is the right path." Jake didn't know why, but he felt a pull toward her, a strange connection he couldn't explain. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you," he said, his voice determined. "But you have to tell me everything. I don't know what's going on here, but I need to know what I'm getting into." The woman gave a faint smile, her violet eyes gleaming with something Jake couldn't quite place. "You will know soon enough," she said. And with that, Jake knew that whatever lay ahead, it was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Secrets of the stars. Jake stared at the alien ship, his hands still covered in grease from trying to fix the damaged engine. He had tried everything he knew, but the ship seemed to resist every attempt. It was as if it was alive, reacting to his touch with an almost mocking indifference. The technology was beyond anything he could have imagined. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, stood nearby, her gaze never leaving him. For the first time, Jake began to feel the weight of what he was involved in. She wasn't just an alien. She was someone from a far-off world, a world with unimaginable technology. And now his fate was tied to hers. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about her that made him feel both terrified and captivated. "I don't know if I can fix it," Jake admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is like nothing I've ever worked on. It's beyond anything I can understand." The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful and purposeful. "You're doing well," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "But there's more to this ship than just mechanics. It's connected to something far more powerful than you realize." Jake looked up at her, his mind racing with questions. "What do you mean? What is this ship really? And who are you?" The woman paused, her violet eyes studying him carefully. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if deciding how much she could reveal. "This ship is not just a machine. It's a vessel of knowledge, ancient knowledge that holds the key to saving your world. My enemies, they know what it holds, and they will stop at nothing to find it." Jake's heart skipped a beat. What kind of enemies? What are they after? The woman took a deep breath and walked over to a control panel on the ship, placing her hand lightly on the surface. The panel hummed with a soft energy, and for a brief moment, the ship seemed to glow. Jake could feel the energy in the air, a strange, electric sensation that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "My enemies are not like the humans you know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are beings from a distant part of the universe, beings who have hunted me across countless worlds. They want the knowledge that lies within this ship, and if they find it, everything will change. For everyone." Jake could feel his pulse quicken. "But why did they come after you? What makes you so important?" The woman's face softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I was once a part of a great alliance, a group of powerful beings who sought to protect the secrets of the universe. But I betrayed them, she said, her voice tinged with regret. I left to find something personal. And that is why they will stop at nothing to find me. Jake took a step closer, trying to understand. You're running from them, aren't you? She nodded slowly. Yes. And they found me. I crashed here because they sabotaged my ship. But I won't give up the knowledge. It is too important to let fall into the wrong hands. Jake's mind was spinning. He had never thought he would be caught up in something so huge, so dangerous. But the more he heard from her, the more he realized that his involvement was no accident. He had stepped into a world far bigger than anything he could have imagined. How do you know all of this? Jake asked, his voice filled with disbelief. How do you know what's in the ship? The woman turned away from the ship, looking out into the distance. I have seen the future, Jake, she said, her voice distant. I've seen what will happen if they get their hands on the knowledge in this ship. And it's not just my world that's at risk. It's yours too. Jake swallowed hard. He had a feeling he wasn't going to like what came next. What are you saying? What will happen? The woman's eyes were filled with a dark intensity. They will destroy your world. Earth will be just another casualty in their quest for power. Unless we stop them. She turned back to face him. And you, Jake, you're the key. Jake took a step back, the weight of her words crashing down on him. What do you mean, I'm the key? I'm just a mechanic. She gave him a sad smile. You're more than just a mechanic. You have the potential to understand the ship, to unlock its secrets. And with that knowledge, we can stop them. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. But I don't know anything about alien technology. I barely understand what's going on here. The woman's expression softened. You will, Jake. You have to. You're the only one who can. Jake's mind raced. How could he, an ordinary mechanic, have anything to do with saving the Earth? But he couldn't ignore the sense of urgency in her voice, the quiet desperation that seemed to hang in the air around them. There was no turning back now. The woman needed him, and somehow he was going to have to find a way to help her, before it was too late. The woman stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. Time is running out. The longer we wait, the closer they get. We need to finish what we started. Jake nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. The stakes had never been higher, and the reality of the situation was hitting him harder than ever. They were up against something far bigger than either of them. And yet, somehow, Jake knew that the only chance they had was to keep moving forward. As he turned back to the ship, his hands trembling, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just been changed forever. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something much, much bigger. And if they didn't act fast, Earth would pay the price. The hidden power. Jake was shaken by the revelation. He had only been trying to fix a broken-down ship, but now he found himself in the middle of a cosmic struggle, one that threatened not just the woman's world, but his own. He looked at her, still trying to process everything she had told him. You said I'm the key, Jake said, his voice trembling. But I don't understand. How can I help you? I'm just a mechanic. I don't have any special powers or knowledge. The woman, who had introduced herself as Alira, gave him a long, steady look. You underestimate yourself, Jake. It's not about having powers. It's about understanding the ship and what it can do. You're here because you have the skills to unlock its secrets. Jake stared at the ship, still baffled by its alien design. The ship was far more advanced than anything on Earth, its surfaces sleek and alive with energy, pulsing softly under the strange lights. He could almost feel the power within it, a power that was waiting to be released. But how could he, a man who had spent his life working on engines and machines, understand something like this? Alara seemed to read his mind. The ship is more than just technology. It's alive, Jake. It responds to certain frequencies, to certain ways of thinking. I can teach you how to communicate with it, how to activate its systems, but you have to trust yourself. Jake shook his head. Trust myself. I don't even know where to start. Elira placed her hand on his shoulder. Start with the basics. The ship responds to your thoughts, your intentions. It's designed to work with you, but it can be difficult for someone who's never encountered anything like this before. Jake nodded slowly, his mind racing. Could he really do this? Could he learn to communicate with a ship that was far beyond anything humans had ever seen? It seemed impossible, but the desperation in Elira's eyes made it clear that there was no time to waste. All right, Jake said, taking a deep breath. I'll give it a shot, but if this goes wrong, it's on you. Elira smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. It won't go wrong. We just have to be careful. This ship is more powerful than you realize, and the more you learn, the more dangerous it will become. Jake stepped closer to the ship, his hands hesitant. The sleek surface seemed to shimmer in response, like it was aware of his presence. He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the cold metal, closing his eyes. He tried to clear his mind, focusing on the ship in front of him. It was like nothing he had ever worked on before. No engine, no machine, had ever felt so alive. Focus on your intent. Elira's voice came softly from behind him. What do you want the ship to do? Think about it. Feel it in your hands. Jake thought hard. He wasn't sure what to do, but the ship felt different. There was a strange energy flowing through it, and he could almost feel it responding to his touch. His fingers tingled, and for a brief moment, he thought he could hear a faint hum, like the ship was alive, speaking to him in a language beyond words. He focused harder, trying to tune into the ship's frequency. Suddenly, the lights on the ship flickered, and a low, vibrating sound filled the air. The panels on the walls shifted, and the air around Jake seemed to grow heavier, charged with energy. His heart raced as he realized that something was happening. He was doing it. The ship was responding to him. Elira stepped forward, her eyes wide with surprise. You're doing it, Jake. You're communicating with it. Jake's pulse quickened as the ship's systems began to activate. Panels slid open, revealing intricate machinery inside, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. It was like stepping into a completely different world. The ship had come to life, and Jake felt a strange sense of pride and fear. He had unlocked something that was never meant to be touched by human hands. But as the ship hummed louder, Jake felt a dark presence creeping in the back of his mind. It was subtle at first, just a faint chill in the air. But then it grew, a feeling of dread that seemed to pulse through the very walls of the ship. He looked at Elira, but she was too focused on the ship to notice. Her face was tense, her expression grim. Something's wrong, Jake muttered, his instincts screaming at him. This feels off. Elira's eyes flickered to him, and for the first time, he saw fear in them. We've triggered a signal, she whispered. The enemies I've been running from, they'll be able to trace this. They'll know exactly where we are. Jake felt his stomach drop. What do we do now? We need to finish what we started, Elira said, her voice low and urgent. This ship holds the key to stopping them. If we don't unlock the final piece, they will come for us. And for Earth. Jake's mind raced. They had activated something powerful. And now, they weren't just fixing a ship anymore. They had opened a door, and whoever was on the other side wouldn't be friendly. He took a step back from the ship, his heart pounding in his chest. How long do we have before they get here? Elira's face was grim. Not long. Maybe hours, maybe less. We have to unlock everything before it's too late. Jake nodded. There was no turning back now. They had started something that couldn't be undone. The clock was ticking, and the enemies Elira had been running from were closer than ever. They had to finish what they began, or it would all be over. And with that, Jake knew one thing for sure. Their fight for Earth had just begun. The pursuit begins. The moment the ship came to life, a cold, unsettling silence fell over the hangar. Jake stood frozen, his hands still resting on the glowing panels of the alien ship. The low hum that had filled the air moments ago now turned into a full, vibrating roar. It was almost as if the ship was calling out, sending out a beacon into the depths of space. Alira's face was pale, and her eyes scanned the surroundings, as though expecting something to appear out of the shadows. Her voice broke the tense silence. "It's too late. They've already picked up the signal." Jake stepped back, his mind racing. "Who are these people you're talking about? Who's coming for us?" Alira's expression darkened. "The Shoreth. They're a ruthless alien race, and they've been hunting me for years. They don't stop until they get what they want. And right now, what they want is this ship." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories about alien invasions, about powerful beings from the stars, but he had never imagined he would be caught in the middle of one. He looked at the ship, its sleek and shining form, now seeming like a dangerous relic from a distant galaxy. "So, what happens now? They're coming for us, right? We need to leave." Alira nodded, her face set in grim determination. "Yes, but we can't just run. We need to make sure this ship is fully activated and ready to defend itself. Only then can we escape. If we don't, the Shoreth will catch us and take the ship." Jake clenched his fists. He couldn't believe this was happening. One moment, he was fixing a broken-down alien ship, and the next, he was involved in a fight for survival against an alien race. But Alira's urgency and the fear in her eyes drove him forward. He couldn't back down now. "How do we finish unlocking the ship?" Alira moved quickly to the center of the ship, her fingers flying over a set of strange symbols that lit up as she touched them. "There are 3 key systems we need to activate: the weapons system, the shield system, and the hyperdrive. Once those are up and running, we can jump to another location. But it won't be easy." Jake moved to stand beside her, his mind focused. "How can I help?" "You'll need to help me with the weapons system," Alira explained, her eyes scanning the alien control panel. "It's like nothing you've ever worked with, but I believe you have the instincts for it. You've been fixing ships all your life, and this one will respond to your touch. Just follow my lead." Jake nodded, though his stomach was filled with a sense of dread. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained for combat, but if what Alira said was true, this ship's weapons could make all the difference between life and death. They had to finish what they started. And fast. As Alira began working on the controls, Jake focused on the weapons system. The ship seemed to come alive under his hands, the panels responding to his touch. It was like the ship was speaking to him, guiding him through the complex interface. Slowly, the weapons system powered up, and Jake felt a sense of accomplishment. But there was no time to celebrate. The Shoreth were coming, and they wouldn't wait. Suddenly, a sharp, loud sound echoed through the hangar. It was the unmistakable sound of a ship entering atmosphere, the thrum of powerful engines that could only belong to an enemy force. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Shoreth were here. "Alira," Jake shouted, his voice urgent. "We don't have much time." Alira's face was tight with focus, but her eyes flicked nervously to the control panels. "I know. Keep working on the weapons. I'm going to activate the shields." Jake turned back to the control panel, his hands flying over the alien symbols. The ship's hum grew louder, the power surging through it. For the first time, Jake felt a strange connection to it, like he was becoming part of the ship. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. The ship's exterior glowed as the weapons system activated. Jake could see energy pulses crackling through the walls, ready to be unleashed. But there was no time to marvel at the power they had just unlocked. The hangar doors began to shake as a ship outside fired its engines, drawing closer. Jake and Alira exchanged a glance, both knowing that the next few moments would decide their fate. "They're almost here," Alira whispered, her voice taut with tension. "We can't hold them off for long. The shields need to come online now." With urgency, Alira worked swiftly, her fingers dancing across the alien controls. The ship's hum intensified as the shield system powered up, encasing the ship in a shimmering protective barrier. Jake took a deep breath, his nerves on edge. The Zhorith would be here any second. The ship was ready, but were they? A loud bang echoed through the hangar, followed by another. The Zhorith had arrived. The ship's metal doors rattled under the force of their weapons. The battle for survival was about to begin. Jake's hand gripped the weapon's control tightly. He had no choice now. He had to fight. They had to survive. Alira's voice came again, steady but urgent. Jake, when the shields are at full power, we have to make a run for it. We can't stay here any longer. Jake nodded, his grip firm on the controls. I'm ready. The Zhorith were closing in, and the countdown to battle had begun. The battle for survival. The deafening roar of the Zhorith ship grew louder by the second. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, the ship's thrumming engines echoing in his ears as the countdown to battle loomed ever closer. He and Alira had made it this far, but there was no turning back now. The shields were up, the weapons system ready, but it was still unclear if they could withstand the full force of the Zhorith's assault. Jake, Alira said, her voice calm but urgent, we have to make every shot count. If we don't, they'll break through the shields before we can even jump. Jake nodded, his hands gripping the weapon's controls. He could feel the ship's power surging beneath his fingertips. The energy he had felt earlier seemed to flow through him now, like an extension of his own body. He wasn't just fixing a ship anymore. He was commanding it. Through the ship's viewports, Jake saw the Zhorith vessel, massive, menacing, and sleek with dark metallic surfaces that shimmered with deadly intent. It was closing in fast, its weapons primed and ready for the strike. Their energy pulses illuminated the darkness of space, streaking toward them like deadly bolts of lightning. Alira's eyes flickered between the control panels, her concentration unwavering. We need to move. Now, she urged. Get us out of here before they can fire. Jake didn't need any more motivation. His fingers flew across the controls, pushing the ship forward with all the speed it could muster. The ship jerked slightly as the engines roared to life, but just as they began to gain momentum, the Zhorith fired. A blast of energy slammed into the ship's shields, sending a violent shockwave through the hull. The lights flickered, and the control panels buzzed with alarms. We've lost power to the forward thrusters, Jake shouted, trying to regain control. Alira slammed her fist against the console. No, keep going. We can't stop now. Jake's pulse quickened as he fought to stabilize the ship, every movement feeling like a battle. He had never piloted anything like this before, but the bond between him and the ship was growing stronger by the second. His instincts took over, guiding the ship in ways he never thought possible. The Zhorith fired again, this time hitting the shields directly. Sparks flew from the console as alarms blared in warning. The shields were holding for now, but for how long? Jake knew they couldn't take another hit like that. Alira, we need to make a jump now, Jake shouted, his voice tight with urgency. Alira looked at him, eyes wide with determination. I'm ready. We need to activate the hyperdrive. It's our only chance. She began pressing buttons furiously, but the ship's systems weren't responding as quickly as they should. The Zhorith ship fired again, but this time, the blast was a direct hit. The shields flickered weakly, and a huge explosion rocked the ship, throwing Jake and Alira off their feet. The lights went out completely, leaving them in darkness. For a moment, Jake thought they were done for. Are you okay? He called out, trying to find Alira in the chaos. Yes, but we're running out of time. Alira's voice was breathless but focused. If we don't get the hyperdrive online, we won't make it. We're sitting ducks out here. Jake scrambled to the controls, his hands trembling as he fought to bring the ship's power back online. He could hear the Zhorith ship closing in, their weapons primed for another strike. Finally, with a surge of power, the hyperdrive system clicked into place. Jake didn't waste a second. He slammed the activation switch, and the ship lurched forward as the hyperdrive powered up, its energy filling the vessel with a bright, pulsing glow. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. Then, with a burst of speed, the ship shot forward, disappearing into the vast emptiness of space. The Zorath ship, still locked on their coordinates, fired one last time. The energy pulse missed by mere inches, the blast streaking into the empty void where the ship had been just moments ago. Jake exhaled sharply, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The battle was far from over, but they had made it, just barely. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, and the feeling of near death was only now beginning to sink in. That was too close, Jake muttered under his breath, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Alara was quiet, her face pale but resolute. We've escaped for now, but the Zorath will follow us. They won't stop until they have what they want. Jake nodded grimly. What do we do next? Alara turned to him, a glint of resolve in her eyes. We fight. We keep running. And when the time comes, we make our stand. Jake swallowed hard, his mind racing. He was in this now, in the heart of an intergalactic war. But despite the fear, despite the danger, a part of him felt alive in a way he had never experienced before. He had a purpose now, and nothing, no enemy, no force in the universe, could take that away from him. For the first time since this all began, he felt ready. The final confrontation. The stars outside the ship's windows were a blur of light as the hyperdrive carried Jake and Alara farther into the unknown. Their breath came in shallow bursts, both still recovering from the close call they had just survived. The Zorath ship was now far behind them, but they knew it wouldn't be long before the enemy tracked them down. Jake could almost feel the weight of their relentless pursuit, like a shadow following their every move. How much time do we have? Jake asked, his voice tight with tension. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on borrowed time, running from a threat that was too vast, too powerful to outrun forever. Alara stood beside him, her eyes focused on the control panel as she analyzed the ship's status. We've got some time. The Zorath don't have the ability to track us through the hyperdrive just yet, but they will adapt. They always do. Jake nodded grimly, his fingers twitching with nervous energy. He had no experience in space combat, and yet here he was, thrust into a battle that would determine the fate of Earth, and possibly the galaxy. Then what's the plan? Jake asked, turning to face Alara. She looked at him with a mix of determination and urgency. We need to find a way to fight back. The Zorath are too powerful, but we have something they don't. Surprise. If we can catch them off guard, we might just stand a chance. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. But how? We can't just fire blindly into space and hope for the best. Alara smiled faintly, her eyes lighting up with a new idea. No, we can't. But I've been thinking about something. There's an old battlefield strategy from my people, a tactic that could work against the Zorath. If we can lure them into a trap, we might just have a chance to defeat them. Jake raised an eyebrow. A trap? How are we going to do that? Alara moved to a nearby console, quickly bringing up a map of the nearby star system. The Zorath ship has a weakness in its engines, but they've reinforced their shields. We can't break through the shields without a direct hit to their engines. But if we set the trap in the debris field of a nearby asteroid belt, we can use the asteroids to create a distraction. We'll use their own weapons against them. Jake's mind raced as he processed the plan. It was risky, but it just might work. You want to lead them into an asteroid field, then fire at them using their own energy blasts. That's crazy, but it might just work. Alara nodded. Exactly. If we position ourselves just right, we can make it so that their own blasts hit the asteroids, creating enough damage to their engines to disable them. It's our only shot. Jake didn't hesitate. Let's do it. The two of them quickly began working in sync, adjusting the ship's course toward the asteroid field Alara had identified. Jake focused on piloting the ship through the debris, weaving between massive rocks and avoiding collisions, while Alara monitored the Zorath ship's position, her eyes narrowing in concentration. As they approached the field, Jake could feel the tension building, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. They were setting the stage for a battle that would determine everything. One wrong move, and they would be finished. But if they succeeded, they could finally strike back against the Zhoreth. Suddenly, the warning alarms blared, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Zhoreth ship had reappeared, faster than expected. It had found them. "We're not ready," Jake shouted. The Zhoreth ship was closing in fast, its weapons powering up. "We have no choice," Alira snapped, her fingers flying across the console. "We need to lure them into the asteroid belt now." Jake's hands gripped the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. The Zhoreth ship fired, and the blast tore through the space behind them, missing them by mere inches. The shockwave rattled their ship, but Jake held steady, navigating the ship into the heart of the asteroid field. The Zhoreth ship followed, unaware of the trap that was set for them. Alira's voice was calm but urgent as she activated the weapons system. "On my mark. Wait for it. Now." Jake turned the ship sharply, positioning them in the perfect line of fire. The Zhoreth ship, now too close, fired once more, its energy blasts hitting the asteroids in their path. The explosion sent debris flying, and one of the larger asteroids collided with the Zhoreth's engines, causing a massive ripple of energy. "Yes," Alira shouted. "It worked. They're disabled." Jake didn't have time to celebrate. The Zhoreth ship was still alive, but it was struggling. He quickly lined up their next move, preparing to deliver the final blow. "We have one shot at this." Alira nodded, her expression fierce. "Make it count." Jake fired, the ship's weapons discharging a concentrated beam of energy. It hit the weakened engines of the Zhoreth ship, causing a violent explosion that rippled through the void. The enemy ship shuddered, its lights flickering as it began to drift into space, powerless and defeated. They had done it. The silence that followed was deafening. The battle was over. The Zhoreth were no longer a threat. At least for now. Jake slumped back in his seat, his body exhausted from the strain, but his heart was racing with adrenaline and triumph. Alira turned to him, her eyes bright with victory. "We did it, Jake. We actually did it." Jake smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Yeah, we did. But this is just the beginning, isn't it?" Alira nodded. "Yes, the Zhoreth may be defeated, but there's still so much more we have to do. We need to rebuild, unite the galaxies, and make sure that Earth stays safe. We've only just started." Jake glanced out the window at the stars, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt hopeful. They had fought back, and they had won. The journey was far from over, but together they would face whatever came next.